The Evil Genie of the computer. All right, what are we on? Episode 117.
Oh, nice.
Welcome, listeners.
Who's
young and old, from far and wide, from the Occident to the Orient.
Individuals and masses.
It is the mass audience. We are on a kick. We're on a kick, seeking out, wherever we may find it, the different forms of post-Marxism and trying to find someone that we like. I haven't heard their first impressions yet, but this was my recommendation because this got me woke. This Baudrillard woke me.
Woke you to what?
to things that I already believed, which is so much of what we say is bullshit. Why don't we just admit it?
I totally felt like I was some of the passages I was reading, like in my brain, it was just Pills's voice.
That is a great compliment. I take that as a profound compliment.
Oh, I wish I could talk like this guy.
This is 1980s Baudrillard. So he wasn't totally crazy yet. He was in the process of becoming crazy. But because a lot of people have heard me talk about this, I don't know about this text, but this era at least of Baudrillard, I wanted to hear your first impressions right off the bat before I editorialize what my thoughts were. So, Victor, especially, I was wondering where you'd fall on this, because this is often the type of writing that you hate the most. But you seem to give a somewhat toe-in-the-water positive response as the political philosopher and lib. So what did you think of 80s Baudrillard?
Overall, I enjoyed reading it. I did think that there were some things about it that I either didn't understand or felt like annoyingly written. But starting with the things that I liked about it, so I found myself broadly agreeing with kind of the challenge. He seems to situate the challenge of mobilizing any kind of a masses, or like getting people to do anything, or like kind of trying to sort of debunk the idea that there is anything that resembles some inner power in human beings to mobilize and do something great. It's kind of like he's taking a big shit on that. And to some extent, I enjoyed that because to some extent, my work does that too. I would say that there's something about this that I felt went a little too far at times, and kind of, he does this thing that I think all theory of this broad genre do, is make these really large general pronouncements about the way society is shaping, and that everything can be reduced to spectacle because it's all just simulation, and simulation is, nothing. And it's just these broad pronouncements where sometimes I was like, yeah, I think there's something to that. But other times I was kind of like, really? And I guess the issue I sometimes have with that is maybe it's just a matter of taste or preference, some kind of like aesthetic preference that I have. But I like specificity. Like, I like to know, what are you specifically talking about? And when theorists make really broad pronouncements to kind of define the age and define the time and define the culture in these broad, large categories, I feel like I'm getting a really like low resolution. The analogy in my mind is always just like really pixelated resolution of what the world is like, where it's like kind of giving me a shape of the way the world is, but the pixels are really big. And I'm just like, yeah, kind of, but I don't know. There's like a lack of specificity, but I liked it. I mean, I think there's some amusing parts in it about like people not desiring anything, and kind of seems like there's some mocking of certain views, and it was like fun to read, even if I didn't always even if I didn't always agree with it. And yeah, like I did like the way that he was pointing out a lot of the ways in which people and the masses, we shouldn't have so much faith, I guess, in the masses, in the possibilities. And I was sympathetic to that, but I also kind of felt like before we started recording, we were talking about this as post-Marxism, and I was kind of thinking, it's just going so far sometimes where it's just like post anything. It's like post rationality, post agency. It's just like kind of saying like nothing's possible except just a kind of self-perpetuating simulation and spectacle. And I find myself not strongly disagreeing, but just kind of agnostic, because of that low resolution thing where I'm like, yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It's maybe a little bit too religious for you.
It does rely on religious metaphors, lots of God, lots of last judgment.
Anyway, Eric, do you have a general pronouncement?
I mean,
If I were to predict your reaction to this, I would have not a clue what to say.
so
nice.
you couldn't predict.
No.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I'm not sure what Eric's going to make of this.
I feel like this is
Do 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 do.
this is like ground zero for me. I mean, I started with postmodernism in my education. I mean, in some ways, yeah, I did, because I came into literature, right? So that's how we divide up the phases of literature. You have kind of romanticism, modernism, and then postmodernism. So it's just accepted in the field I was brought up in that these are the divisions, right? Because you see very different trends going on in modernist literature, whatever, Virginia Woolf, Hemingway, Faulkner, etc. And then you see very different trends emerging in the 50s and 60s, and they relate these to similar things, right? Like technological, scientific progress, the bomb, World War II, advanced capitalism. I mean, this stuff makes sense to me in tracking these cultural trends. I'm not as experienced with like confronting it on the level of philosophy as opposed to kind of like postmodern aesthetics. I get the aesthetic background a little better than I get the philosophical side of it. But I mean, Baudrillard's like kind of ground zero for me. I read The System of Objects years ago, which was like 20 years before this text we're reading. But he's on to similar things, right? I specifically read the part on collection and being like a collector and collection objects, where you take them out of circulation and you kind of arrange them on your shelves and their value completely transforms. But I found that very fascinating because I was doing a material culture course. So yeah, read The System of Objects. And we had discussions in class, and it was actually really interesting because it was like, what are you into? And one guy was into, oh my God, what actor was it? Like collecting every single Nicolas Cage movie on DVD or something like that. Like people just came out with these extremely weird things they're into. You just ask somebody like, hey, do you collect stuff? And you might be surprised by that. And I don't know, read The System of Objects, and he kind of gives you like a broad understanding of like items in capitalist circulation versus like the kind of collector networks, which kind of abuts again on like art objects and museum studies and those sorts of things that taking a material culture course might prepare you for career-wise in the future. So this stuff makes sense to me. I mean, as like political theory, I mean, oh my God, I'm not going to do anything with this. But its sensibilities and its kind of, I guess I can't call it aesthetic. It's obscenities. I already kind of move with these kinds of ways of thinking. So my reaction is also like this battery of ideas coming up is something I don't have a lot of facility with. Again, debauchery, obscenity, seduction, these I don't know what you even call them. Are they concepts here? Whatever. These deployments are a little bit strange to me.
Now, do you mean battery as you are being battered by them, or battery as a source of energy?
I mean like a battery is in just like an array, a set, a battery.
Good word.
Yeah.
To your point about his earlier, like, what was it? The
System of Objects.
Yeah. So I would still say that's him in like a neo-Marxist phase, because he's very much with Marx, pushing against it a little bit in the same way that Debord did, and we've talked Debord to death. But Marx, of course, drew this distinction between use value and exchange value, and says like the use value is kind of being dominated by exchange value and the commodity form. But the system of objects is saying that the fundamental opposition is also It's moved from, I'll put it this way, it's moved from production to consumption, where consumption is the main determinant in affluent societies, at least. Consumption is like the means of class domination. It doesn't mean consuming objects, but like you're talking about, collecting. There's no use and exchange value to a collection. It's for other reasons. It's a conspicuous consumption. But I think here he's going even further past that we could properly call it post-Marxist. I don't know anyone who's called it that. It's just kind of a term that we're working with. But he wants to just give up the theory of history. And I kind of found it interesting when Victor was saying he's trying to define the age, because I think he's doing the opposite. In a little, like De Boer for sure was trying to define the age. We live in the age of the spectacle. We were this, and now we're this. Whereas I think for Baudrillard, the talking about history and theorizing about history and giving ages and we moved from this to this, and then like potentially there's a virtual future that we move to something else. I think he's very much given up on that. And you can see that also in his work on the symbolic, where all societies are kind of the same in their dealing with images. And images are always the dominant form. Commodities is a Marxist fantasy, you could call it, to say, no, this is the thing that's important. This is the thing that everyone's cared about. If we could deal with the commodity and, you know, the means of its production, then that would move history. And I think that's the thing that he's really giving up on. Although I wouldn't say he's anti-Marxist, because he's also very concerned with production still. But it happens to be, you know, image production.
Yeah, production of images and signs. Yeah, one thing I picked up on that, I like they seem to turn against use value and point out, I actually thought this was kind of like Derrida and Spectres of Marx, but maybe it was Baudrillard in those two like early 70s texts, The Mirror of Production and the Critique of the Political Economy of the Sign. He talks about use value being a kind of, you know, just as metaphysical, let's say, as exchange value. But we rely on it because it's connected to human need, right? We're in a productive situation where we're producing because of the use value, because its use satisfies a human need. And so we've put the human kind of as the metaphysical center of our productive system. But he argues against that, saying, you know, use values is like a fiction of exchange value. It's something that the sort of, I don't know what you call it, like the marketing image, the image apparatus deployed around exchange value kind of just creates the illusion that it's useful or there's some kind of underlying use of satisfying some human need, when all that's just bullshit. And you can't use use value as like a more stable ground on which to orient production in some future better, less capitalist societies, as maybe something like that. But yeah, the focus is on use value.
Yeah, even Baudrillard's critiquing the theoretical approach to that, saying you could only have this mindset already being wholly within the order already established by capitalism. Mm-hmm. And then that's why he goes back to ancient societies and the gift and the mouse thing. Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't say the mouse thing. That sounds weird.
The mouse thing.
The Disneyland. The gift exchange. Yeah. Because the gift economy preceded and is located also within ours, but the gift economy symbolic exchange is resistant to that capitalist mode.
And there is no use value there. Like the material qualities of the object didn't matter when fucking Odysseus is giving Agamemnon a cauldron and a tripod. It's not because he's like, I needed something to cook my soup or dry my boots. Thanks, buddy. It's a fucking symbolic gesture to perpetuate the exchange.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say though that the reason I was getting the impression of defining an age, I think you're right that he's not like naming the age specifically, but he does make a lot of statements. Like I just from skimming through it quickly, like on page, I think like 115, like this is just an example. He'll be like, it's no longer possible to do this, right? It's, you used to be able to say something in order to unmask its rhetoric, but it's like to denounce, but we cannot say, right, anything anymore. And it's like, he does a lot of this thing of like, we used to be able to do this and now we can't do this because of whatever. It's all a simulation, or that's what I mean by kind of giving these broad statements on what is now the case and what used to not be the case or something.
Yeah, you get the sense that he's an academic who hates academics and a theorist who hates theorists.
Yeah, I feel like he's talking to others.
Often what he means by we is usually theorists. Because he's,
Yeah,
for example, saying, we have always assumed the masses to be miserable. He means theorists have. But yeah.
Right.
To your point,
yeah, it's sort of hard to see like from what position he's speaking sometimes, if he's like parroting another point of view or if he's actually giving his own, and the lack of any like references or citations makes that even more difficult. And I even glanced at earlier stuff, and he does this same sort of thing. He quotes Canetti saying, past a certain point in time, history has not been real, and then he questions whether that point in time ever existed. So you say history is no longer real, but then you have to go back and say, but was that point at which it became no longer real, is that point actually a point? Like what is this point now? And how can we even go back to this point and discover it? He kind of says he calls it the dead point, the dead center, where every system crosses this subtle limit of reversibility, and then questions whether this point is real or whether it's, I don't know, just some kind of another useful fiction within the simulated real.
Yeah, he says a couple things at the beginning too about morality. Like, I think he goes through a couple things. I'm actually trying to find the pages because I thought I'd highlighted it, but
I think he's responding to his contemporaries, and we could say this with a lot of the post-Marxists that we've read so far, is they seem to be very still concerned with morality. Like, morality is history has a moral or even a morale. It's headed somewhere. We can help it. We can hinder it. And the idea that Baudrillard's putting forward is like, you will never get there. And the problem is not that you don't believe hard enough. The problem is that you already believe way too much. You believe in illusions that you're not prepared to get rid of. And so one of the main ones here in the section that we read, one of the main moral, I don't know what you call it, like an injunction. The moral injunction rests upon the masses to, overthrow the bourgeoisie, or to move history forward, or to recognize their immiseration, I want to say. So if that's not possible, and this kind of comes back to what we were talking about a few weeks ago in terms of the masses never really do anything unless they're very upset, unless they're starving. If they're starving, they will do something. But otherwise, they are not a force of changing history. They're not a force of mobilization, as a Marxist might see them, or at least a humanist Marxist might see them. They're actually a force of inertia.
Yeah.
They stop things from happening in society. They are there as a preventative measure to make sure things change very slowly, rather than as this group of people that you can wake up to their immiseration and will then change society. So I think that's a very it's a hard pill to swallow if you're coming from a Marxist perspective.
It's what the kids might call a black pill. I like there's parts when he says, people didn't really want revolution. They wanted a spectacle of it. I think he's quoting someone, Rivarol. And then he's like, if our perversion lies in this, that we never desire the real event, but its spectacle, never things but their sign, and the secret derision of their sign, it means that we don't really want things to change. The change must also seduce us. I remember liking that, because it's like, that does sound kind of like a point. I mean, I would never write it that way, but that does sound like a point. I feel like I've even made in the past when we're talking about, like when we were talking about the spectacle, I think I was saying something like, But the spectacle isn't the thing exerting the force. Like the people are also making it possible. I think I said something like that. And that quote kind of reminded me of it. It's like, we need the things to seduce us in order for them to work on us. Otherwise, like there's inertia, I think.
Yeah. And when he did reference somebody, I did look it up. I tried to. And de Rivarol is a French royalist, 19th century. And that was about the French Revolution, what he was saying.
Oh, right. Yeah, right.
So he's actually engaging
that makes sense.
He's engaging with like 19th century moral philosophers and like whatever, sociology, political economy. None of that was really separate back then. We have our disciplinary specificities today that was completely alien to them. But yeah, he was saying that about the French Revolution.
Can I just say too, I found it amusingly being this like corrupt society or something. He's like, from like, what does he say? From like mama to the mafia. He's like talking about all Italians, like how it's like an example of an immoral society living off its own profound immorality.
But they've accepted it. They're not like the States that has this Puritan streak, but they're still reveling in the profits. They're not doing that.
And they know that there's just like a game where everyone kind of knows that no one really obeys the rules. And they kind of like, there's kind of an unwritten, kind of reminds me of something Zizek would talk about, where there's kind of like unstated rules that everyone knows. And there's like, and I guess there's like more honesty. And I will say that when I was in Italy not long ago, I did kind of get this sense that there was this unwritten. I remember it specifically when I was in the Amalfi Coast with like the buses, and there'd be like a schedule, and I kept getting empty promises about like when the bus was coming, because they were all there standing around the buses. And I was like, so when are you going to leave? He's like, oh, probably another like 10 minutes. I'm like, we're there for like 20 minutes, and they like move the bus somewhere else. And you're just like, and no one seems rattled about it. Like the locals don't seem rattled about it, but I'm just like, what is this fucking weird game that I don't understand what the rules are?
That's actually really fascinating, because the unwritten rule is that the rules don't matter.
Right.
So even if they say something, then you have to assume, okay, he says I'm leaving in 10, it's probably 20, it could be 30. But Baudrillard talks about America in these other terms of this morass. It's just a land of contradictions, which actually echoes something Eric said last week. But this land of contradictions where you have the greatest excesses in vice in something like Vegas, or I don't know, New Orleans or New York in the 80s, these kind of things. They're just like the pure excess. And then at the bottom, there's still this very puritanical sense about rules and children and religiosity and protection. And these two things exist very happily side by side. You have one version that's Disneyland, where the kids go to hug Mickey Mouse, and then you have Vegas as the flip side, and these are the true Americas. Despite all the rhetoric of this religious purity, moral purity, laws about what can be shown on TV, I can't imagine that kind of thing happening in France, for example.
Yeah, the US is an interesting example. I've often thought that about America, just like a weird contradiction of extremes.
He calls it both social and wild. He says that the true, in spite of its morality, puritanism, and obsession with virtue, its true motor is the abjection of free enterprise. I mean, that stuff, I guess the point is that stuff, runs on immorality as opposed to morality. I think the old school way that we were talking about of regarding, let's say, the masses is that they are morally deprived. They are the source of immorality in any society, and they must be educated out of their bestial, immoral existence. And so these some of the people he's citing are they're discussing things like charity schools and doing things for the betterment of the lower classes, this sort of magnanimous aristocratic charity, and they're arguing about whether or not it's going to have a good effect. And some of them say, yeah, of course, like getting their moral virtue contributes to the overall society. And other people are saying, no, because if you teach them morality, they actually become, if you teach them, they become more materialistic, like the upper classes. And we don't want to have too many materialistic people because we can't support that. The schools will become too expensive and we'll have to shut them all down. And it'll ultimately be a drain on society. So let's just leave them in their fallen state. I mean, like, those are the kinds of fucking arguments these sociologists or whatever, these political economists are having in the 19th and 18th century. And he's keyed into this stuff because he's a social theorist, although you probably can't use the term social as of this text, at least. He's a theorist of some kind. But that fundamental kind of immoral energy, I mean, I guess backing up, one of my overall takes is the victory of the object over the subject. The object is now sort of getting its revenge. It's turning on the subject. It's instead of the subject having mastery and understanding of the object is actually completely dominating. It's the seduction, I guess the evil genie or the object, the irony of passion, these terms he's using is that reversal of the object where we think we've dominated it, we've absorbed it into our conceptual frameworks, and lo and behold, we really haven't. We're actually the stooge of the strategy that the object's like running a game on us.
Yeah, this is kind of the point of the text, and we're getting into the heart of it now, is as academics, especially Eric, you and I, we've both probably said this before, but don't succumb to the subject-object duality. Right? That's a bad duality to fall into. Don't privilege the subject. And then we kind of go, yeah, but the object's there too. Baudrillard goes further than that. And this is what he calls evil, is to join sides against subjectivity, which is really, in a sense, to join sides against all of Western philosophy. So this is a dump on Western philosophy in general. Is to say, no, I'm going to take the immoral side. I'm going to take the evil side. And this is what seduction is. I think he's got a book with seduction in the title. But anyway, seduction is the power of the object to play this shell game with subjects so that the subjects think that they're in control. And really what he means by subjects is theorists. Theorists who... Whether you're a New York Times theorist or a philosophy school theorist, it doesn't matter to him. I think
even a scientist in that too.
Even a scientist, yeah. The object always appears where the scientist expects. But in terms of morality and evil, he kind of recalls Manichaeanism or Gnosticism by saying, we've always believed the world to be at bottom rational from the Christian perspective, which is the scientific perspective, which is the metaphysical perspective. And instead, we should think of the world as succumbing to the things that we believe about it over and over and over again in order to trick us into this lulled state of certainty or lulled state of domination where we are in control. If you take that at face value alone, it's kind of an absurd thing to say. But if you take it from the perspective of someone who's really becoming anti the theory perspective or anti-academic, then he's saying you can continue sitting there, publishing your books, going to your conferences, writing about how much you know. And in the end, what you know and what you don't know doesn't matter because whatever's going to happen is going to happen anyway. It doesn't matter how many pamphlets you publish. So he says, we're going to take the side of evil, or he is at least. I'm going to go take the side of evil. If you're going to make a duality, I'll take the evil side because it's more fun. And he goes on to say that like before whatever you want to call the Western tradition, primitive people didn't see it any differently than that. They didn't trust their gods. They didn't believe that their gods were really in the know. They invented them so that they could put them to death. And he kind of gets onto a primal human urge here. The reason that we even have politics, the reason we have parties, voting, political systems, or even before that, kings and lords, is so that we have someone to Oedipalize against, someone that we can just hate. And that is the seduction of the person in power. The seduction is to believe, oh, they are supporting me and worshiping me and voting for me, so I'm going to believe that I do have that power. And that would be an example of that seduction, is to believe what the masses give you, when the masses aren't really giving you anything. They're going to do the lowest common effort. They're an inertial force, not a historical force.
Yeah, and even history itself, he says, the way history moves, progress doesn't come from morality and value. It comes from immorality and vice, hence the evil genie. The evil genie behind it all is immorality and vice. It's this dark energy that drives forward actually scientific progress and moral reasoning and construction of value systems and our own writing our histories, coming to understand ourselves in a maybe like a collective objective sense. It's actually immorality that drives that forward. This deeper energy he talks about is, I guess there's some interchangeable, closely related terms. Yeah, it's the genie, immorality, vice, debauchery, all these ideas. Like he's zoning in on this sort of immoral, absent core that drives all these sort of positive things forward, and we forget about that immoral core, or prefer. I don't know how to go forward with that one. We prefer not to look at it or to deny that it exists, and we kind of persecute people. Like one of his points of bringing up Manichaeism is that it's one of those movements in history that have posited that like reality is evil. Or reality is an illusion. And there's some evil genie or evil deity behind it all, kind of fooling us and tricking us into thinking that appearances are verifiable and real, when really no. But those kinds of people tend to get, called heretics or dismissed and persecuted. But he's fully taking on, like you said, Pills, he's fully sort of gonna take on this cynical view of society, which looks at that, and he says this view itself is not immoral, and that's the point. It's like almost like ignoring that immorality and vice, which makes sense to me in a way, right? Vice is just self-serving behavior, and what do we do? What is capital? Capital runs on that, right? We go out, we buy shit, right, for ourselves. We're not buying shit for the betterment of society. Although, after big disasters, when we get encouraged to go out and purchase, that's what it seems to be. But really the main movement is immorality.
Yeah. Go to the mall. Don't stop buying. This is profoundly anti-Hegel. This is like the most devastating assault on Hegel on all fronts. That Hegel is on the side of God, and Baudrillard is saying, well, if you're God, then I will take the side of the devil.
Yeah, like it makes so much sense to me. Like competition, like he brings up competition is the new morality, and competition is actually immoral. But it's moral to, like in a way it would be immoral to, take competition away, hence like antitrust laws. And we seek competition. We seek a fair playing field, so let's say, through those kinds of laws. And yet competition is not moral. People aren't making, this isn't gentleman's war where there's these kinds of rules of conduct. Competition is what it is. It has to be competitive. It can't be half-assed. Same with fashion, same with all these other, I don't know why he brings up glory, but fashion, gambling. I was complaining about gambling apps. Gambling is better than work, and gambling is immoral. And yet, we gambling addiction we're always going on about, and yet gambling is a humongous stimulus to the economy. Holy fuck! And pornography, of course. Pornography is the new beauty, and pornography is immoral. whereas in, so let's say, in Kant, beauty is the symbol of the true. Yeah, but he's saying this is actually a more objective view, because he's taking into account, I presume, that reversibility of the object. Just when we think we've got it, it's not there. It's somewhere else tricking us into moving forward with our experiments and our investigations and our pursuits and our desires.
Well, doesn't he call this section ironical strategies? Is that right? So what does he mean by that? Ironical
I gotta
strategies.
admit, I've tried to figure that out several times, and the only thing I can think of is irony is the displacement of meaning from the text, right? I mean, not just textual irony, but there's more meaning than what you're saying in an act of verbal irony or a context. So the only thing that I'm thinking that can mean is that there is a scene where what you say happens, plays out. Like, we live in a democracy. We live in a democratic society. It's a great example. But the meaning of it is elsewhere. The meaning of it is in death and not an inequality and exporting misery. And yeah, like Eric said, our morality gives way, and it's fueled actually by the energies of immorality. So it's not a strategy to overcome anything. It's a strategy to be more objective. And objective meaning taking the object's side, but also objective as being more realistic. This is real. This is what actually happens. Despite what any, no offense, democratic theorist says on the surface is what's happening, we can just look and know that the meaning is elsewhere. And this is also in place when he talks about polling, like democracy just runs on polls. Everyone watches the polls. The people that vote watch the polls so that they know what to believe. Then the people that are ostensibly in power for their term, they watch the polls so they know what to do. So there's nothing that ever happens because the people that don't know what to believe watch polls in order to believe something. And then the people that are in power just respond to those polls as images, objects. So nothing ever happens. And you can see this in his favorite place in the world, America, because who you vote for doesn't make a shit of difference. Even if you vote for the guy that you want to win, if he wins, he can't do anything after that, because the power is elsewhere, in the obscene, in the death, in war, in invasions, illegal invasions, in gambling, in the drug industry. So I think that's what it means by ironic, is that we become obscene. Obscene just means against the scene. And he's saying that we still live in this massive scene of where we live, that theorists believe, that specifically people who are paid to think about this, they believe that this is what it is. Then Trump shows up and he's obscene and everyone loses their mind, like the system's collapsing. When for him, the system has already collapsed. It collapsed long before Trump. It collapsed. He's writing, what is this, 1983, something like that. It collapsed a long ass time ago, and it was the meaning system that collapsed. So the irony for him is to just say, to displace the meaning of his words as a theorist and say, I'm going to just be the theorist that says that I know what's going on.
Do you think that,
oh yeah.
So like earlier, and I think it's implied here kind of, I mean, the reason I was hearing your voice when I was reading this is because I do think there's this kind of ideas don't matter kind of subtext here. Not even just subtext, but I think in some sense, blatant.
Overt text.
Yeah, exactly. Overt. But I suppose I wondered, like, I kind of want to challenge you, Pills, on this and just say, like, do you really believe that? Because I think, you know, not to litigate the episode we did on the whole Zizek article, but like you were very heated and it seemed like it mattered, right? Like what Zizek was writing about trans people and like certain ideas that float around. Like, so I guess, do you think there might be a contradiction there for you, at least in like how far this thesis can go, that it can all just be reduced?
No, I was objecting to Zizek believing that his ideas mattered more than any other consideration at that time. I think the considerations, particular as they are far more important than any idea about those specific ideas.
Yeah, and in a way, he's saying here, in an ironical sense, that ideas are all that matter.
Right.
Right? Nobody cares about what does he say here? Like, how do our rational and programmed societies, how do our supposedly rational societies, how do they function? You know, what makes them work? Is it scientific progress and objective information and collective happiness and understanding of facts and causes and proper punishment for the guilty, all that? He says, no, what fascinates everyone is the debauchery of science, that reality is everywhere and always debauched by science. And when we go watch debates, when we get into the public forum and we you know, get into these idea conflicts with people, like that's the spectacle there. That's what, like, so in a way, all people care about are ideas in terms, insofar as it's a simulated kind of, you know, truth procedure. We're simulating arguments, and we're simulating getting to the truth. We're sort of falling into this. I mean, he didn't say a whole lot about it in this chapter, but I assume that's what the kind of ecstasy is. It's like the passion of the subject for the object, kind of like, I guess in ecstasy meaning sort of standing outside. You know, we have this passion, this almost like in the religious sense, like the passion of Christ, where we throw off ourselves and we try to meet the object naked as it is. And so then the ecstasy of the social becomes the masses, the ecstasy of sex becomes whatever, porn, the ecstasy of which it ends up having, like, that's being the more real than real, right? The ecstasy of ideas.
I have to interject with this, but the reality of the economy being gambling, he wrote this in 83. Before crypto, before speculative assets, before the tech bubbles. I think that's extremely profound and exactly on point.
Oh, even the polling shit too, right? Remember, like, was it in the 90s? Was it like the Bill Clinton and Tony Blair administrations? They'd hired these campaign managers who ran pretty much totally on polls. Like polling became so important in politics, and it resulted in these huge catastrophes, like that enormous, God, I'm forgetting my history, but that huge train disaster in Britain as a result of these like poll governments who can only operate. I mean, and this is how fucking Hollywood operates too, right? Focus groups, right? How do I make a good movie? Well, I got to show it to focus groups, and I got to poll people, and I got to get opinions about things. Like, I think that stuff is very prophetic too about the polls. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off there. I was excited.
No, I like it. That's good. We believe in it too much still, even still. And that's why he's saying, you know, all of this is going to crash in disaster. It's going to be fatal. So I am going to be, instead of a theorist who changes anything, I'm going to be a fatal theorist. I'm going to hold theory hostage. I'm going to be a theoretical terrorist, all of his fun little quips, because I know that it's already done. And I know in the end that the object wins. People don't win. Humans are not going to win. The proletariat is not going to overthrow the bourgeoisie.
So he'd rather make a more interesting object with his theory.
Yeah, exactly. So he even says that. He says that explicitly. He says that explicitly at the end of this chapter, even if for no other reason that it's more interesting to do theory this way, we should do theory this way. Instead of being correct, instead of being right, instead of being the most radical, and I think he says the word radical like a whole bunch of times in here. But the most radical position is just to say ideas don't matter, and to be the theorist, the champion's ideas not mattering. So maybe that's where I found some
that's interesting,
profound sympathy
but
here.
Eric,
debauchery of ideas is more powerful than reality.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say is, like, I think it's not so much that ideas don't matter. I mean, I think Eric was saying in a way it's only ideas that matter, because it's all part of this, like, it's
more real than real.
Exactly. It's what makes the spectacle like this seductive thing that you want to participate in.
True. We're using ideas in two ways here, though, right?
Yeah, it's the flip side, right? Yeah.
One is ideas drive society, history. We need to have a reasonable discourse of ideas. And the other one is saying, no, the exchanges of language are the only thing that matters, which frees you to do anything. You don't have to be on the right side of history. If there is no history, you can say whatever you want for effect. You can
I guess it'll only matter whatever works.
In fact, history always moves by the wrong side.
Yeah, well, it's not even whatever works. It's what's the most seductive, what's the most fascinating.
Right.
Yeah,
well, seductive, I guess,
is a key term in this.
That's a criteria. That's a criteria of like what works, I guess. Maybe like what's fascinating, but what's going to actually get kind of currency within the simulation, right? The seductive simulation. That's what I mean by effective, right? It's like what's going to have the most.
Oh yeah, what communication reproduces itself the most?
Exactly.
But dude,
that would be like
that's
your
the
metric.
reason. That's the reason Zizek got famous in the first place, and the reason that we all liked him.
Right.
Yeah, and the right too, right? Like this isn't all working for the best too, right? Jordan Peterson got famous in the same space, which is this sort of postmodern media space, right? Post 1960s. I mean, it's hard to deny. We haven't been alive long enough to have seen all the changes, but I mean, it's hard to deny that. I mean, this seems almost like a very kind of updated version of when we did Leotard too, right, on the postmodern condition, because he's talking about the same thing. Scientific advances in technology have pushed us into this new condition, and especially the sort of commercialization and miniaturization of these technologies, which are first deployed in war, and then they become commercialized and consumer items, and these things are pushing us into a new like cultural condition, okay, and that condition is a proliferation of images and relaying messages and copying copies and mass proliferation of just objects, of things you can think about, right? And that's the situation, and this is, I don't want to say it's descriptive of it, because it's like that's not reality, but it's the ecstasy of the real. It's the real standing outside itself as simulation. And the hyper real, which is more real than real, and we don't really want or know or care if there was a real that it's replaced, because how do we even go back to that point from within the hyper real? We don't do it.
I want to go back to Jordan Peterson a second, because there we go into the ethical question, which Baudrillard would not believe in. There's not an ethical question to Jordan Peterson. But the common response to Jordan Peterson is his audience is a bunch of dumb 20-year-olds. We've said that on this podcast literally before. They are dumb. And if there's an answer to Jordan Peterson, it's not to read his books and to dissect his lectures and to point out where he's wrong, because nobody cares whether or not he's right or wrong. People don't follow him because he's right. It's impossible for anyone to follow someone because they're correct in this day and age, if we're taking Baudrillard seriously. So the reason that the reason that Jordan Peterson would have so much success in this environment, in the simulated history, that's not real history anymore, is because there's no one else fascinating. So this would be a failure of the academic cloistered types, the explainer types, the people who are going to put each one of Jordan Peterson's claims on the pedestal of reason and decide whether or not he's wrong, what he's correct about, when he made a false statement, when he made a misleading statement. That's all wrong. You can't do it that way. You have to be fascinating. You have to out-fascinate if there's something that you disagree with. But I agree with that. You can't fall back onto some sort of morality and say, Jordan Peterson is bad because he's immoral, because we're past that.
Yeah, he's seductive, right? And that, he even says that about the revolution and change, right? We don't want change. Change has to seduce us.
Exactly.
Right? Revolution has to be seductive. And the problem with that is it can work either way. It can be a revolution or it can be a de-evolution. it doesn't necessarily go the way we want it to. It's just something, until that point, until we're absorbed in some kind of fascination with some new trend and we're willing to change, again, that's us being seduced by something out there, some object, some object in a very like broad sense, but
or
the
image,
object,
the object is the world. But doesn't this make so much sense of why, like, Joe Rogan is the most popular podcaster? He is just the most neutral. I'm not sure if I believe that. Does he ever ask why? Not really. Doesn't go into depth in anything. He's the most neutral, speak for the masses. He's the object of the object masses guy you can actually find. And also the most popular podcaster that exists. And everyone, you can call him stupid all you want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. No one cares whether he's stupid.
Yeah,
no
totally.
one's listening to him to change anything.
No, I agree. I mean, I think this makes sense to me. I agree. Like the whole point about things being seductive, like it does frustrate me when, on Jordan Peterson, people just want to focus on how wrong he is about certain things that he says, as opposed to trying to ask the question of like, well, why is he seductive? Why do people like him? What is it that he's capturing, right? And I think that's where you can have interesting conversations about the way the culture is talking to young men, right? That there's like a failure because it's seducing young men. I think I agree with that kind of framing, but I think...
By the way, I need to correct, we're using seduction in the wrong way there. Fascinating is what you probably want to say.
Fascinating, yeah, okay.
Because seduction has a specific definition.
Right, okay.
Sorry for being the language cop.
No, that's okay. Does he mean seductive? Because he also talks about how revolution needs to be seductive. So what's the difference there?
It's more like it maybe from... It's a perspectival thing. Fascination. Seduction draws you in. Fascination.
Seduction is the power of the object.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is the power of the world. Whereas the fascination is the power of the image.
Okay, so you're saying that for Jordan Peterson, as an image, it's fascinating. So it fascinates you and it pulls you in. But as opposed, okay.
Because Baudrillard wants to take the side of seduction.
I guess the object there might be sort of like what are his common themes, whatever, like masculinity might be like one of those things that's sort of an object we're thinking about.
The individual, the sanctity of the individual.
Yeah, those things would be the objects exerting a seductive force, and Jordan Peterson, the sort of silver fox with his nice suit standing there, that would be like the fascinating image of the man kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so I agree with that account. I think for me, where I don't know if this is actually in Baudrillard or if this is just kind of the way Pills expresses his agreement with Baudrillard, but I sometimes think that there's maybe an overly discounting the real effect that these images can have in the world. And that because I think sometimes I hear you, Pills, kind of saying like, great, celebrating, like, I don't need to care about anything because like it's all images, it doesn't matter, it's all bullshit. And well, I kind of agree in the way, like in framing things in this way as, are they fascinating? Are they seductive? Right? I think that's a good way of framing it, as opposed to kind of instead of foregrounding this kind of rational morality, foregrounding seduction, fascination makes more sense to me. But I also think that what's being forgotten here is the actual material impact that one thing taking like all the airtime can have. And again, going back to our controversial episode, on Zizek and the trans issue. Look, I think that like the hysteria around trans people right now is having a material impact, right, on people's lives. There's laws being passed because of fucking crazy people like Christopher Rufo or Jordan Peterson or, whatever. And I think a lot of people objected to Zizek talking about that because he's kind of he's dipping his toe into that large kind of cycle of hysteria. So like, yes, we can frame it this way, but can we just be like, I don't need to care about anything anymore? No, I don't think that follows, in my opinion.
When you when you have recourse to material and effects, and he has this section on cause and effect, right? and he's, I mean, on the one hand, he's trying to kind of do the Laclau and Mouffe thing and eliminate determinism from the picture. Determinism, like when you look for determinants, like say determinants of social welfare or whatever, right? Like what are the determinants of that? You look at for those things and then you say, okay, these are the causes. These are the causes, and the effect is the, you know, what people experience. And in a way, he's trying to break down that cause effect determinated thing, that opposition. So I mean, I don't, the recourse to the material is kind of going back to a Marxist framework that he doesn't.
Well, okay,
even
so
Laclau and
me-
Mouffe for a little bit, like, you know,
okay, so
economic
let me
determinism,
rephrase.
let's say.
Let me rephrase in terms of material. Like, okay, so laws, like if you're a trans person and laws are changing so that you can't get medication, I don't know what to call that other than a material effect in the world.
That's a good point. And it's the common view. You know, Jordan Peterson and Matt Walsh are making people transphobic. But here, that is confusing the cause for the effect. Because if Jordan Peterson were not transphobic, he would not have a platform. That is his platform from his first YouTube video. And his platform is not his. His position, or any politician's position, is already that of the mass. And the mass is, you know, at a general, largely unconcerned level, transphobic. Precisely because it is a change and the mass resists change. And maybe this is a good example. The mass 25 years ago was homophobic, and probably still is, but, you know, hear me out at least. You put Will and Grace on TV. You put gay characters on TV. A bunch of celebrities come out as gay. That is what does the seduction. And the seduction is actually what changes anything. So in simulation, the media change happens first. It's not a change based on rationality. It's not a change based on morality. Like, it's not like Obama legislated about gay marriage because it was the right thing to do. He did it because it was popular. It was the popular thing to do. And it was popular because of that seduction of the image, not because it was morally correct. So you don't argue the mass into changing. It's something that has to be seduced.
I think it would be the way you analyze them. Like, you know, people are talk about, you know, what caused, like that most recent shooting, right? Everybody's waiting about, because we've heard a little bit about this, like, recent shooter might be trans, and we're waiting. What were the motives behind this thing they've done? Is it trans issues, or is it something unrelated? You know, we're waiting for the cause of every shooting. We're waiting for them to come out and determine the cause. And he's saying that doesn't matter because we're getting this stuff from the media. We're getting this is all part of the simulation. We're simulating an investigation, and we're simulating the resolution, and we all go away with a good understanding. Our minds are now clear because we know what caused this last horrific incident. I think he's just trying to get away from that, right? Like he's like Spectacle 2.0 here. There's no economic determining factors behind these things. And in the individualist language, there's no causal motive making people do things like this, right? You're seduced by some kind of worldview. You're seduced by some, you know, array of signs and signifiers that point to whatever, immigrants are the problem, target some Latinx community. You become seduced by these things. So then how do you talk about causation when you're being drawn in and when these events are being simulated before us on the media? You know, when we watch like a Sherlock Holmes movie or read a book, you know, we're so titillated and the ecstasy of solving the problem, right? And that big explanation at the end, Sherlock always does, right? Of how everything went down and what led to what and cause and effect, leading to this nice bow being tied on the whole situation. Which it reminds me of the way like Zizek talks about film noir, right? Like that the end requires the death of the subject. It requires the death of the main character, usually, whoever it is, like the main detective, usually drawn in by the femme fatale, right? The femininity of the object, right? Which, again, we're not saying femininity is tied to biological factors. That's another problem, because we say biology causes people to be feminine. No, but again, it's this new way he's trying to articulate. And so, that's probably so unclear. But yeah, like I think cause and effect falls out of that, and we're getting away from determination in a way. I don't know. If any of that made sense, you can respond to it.
So you're saying that nothing has you're saying that nothing has a cause or effect on this view.
That's not true at all.
I think there's a self movement, right? It is Hegelian in that sense, in that there is a self movement of the object. It's not cause and effect. It's a self movement, and it's this evil core that moves it. Whether the object is the economy, whether the object is the social, which we don't believe in anymore with Baudrillard here, we don't believe in it. The social is a self-moving force. It's like its own cause, right? And its appearance is predicated on its disappearance. Like its effect precedes the cause, right? Like remember that part about sacrifice when he's talking about politics. And the way politicians have to, like, nobody wants power, right? Everybody, like the people who are in the know, they don't want the power, because the person who is the image of power, the big brother figure, is the sacrificial lamb, right? It reminds me, I just read like Oedipus again, and what's his name? Croesus, the king, the other king. Who, well, not Oedipus. Oedipus is the king of Thebes, and the other guy, he says, Oedipus wants to leave, and the other guy says, I don't want power, because power leads to these issues, right? He's a smart politician. He doesn't want to be in the place of power. We're always struggling, not like when you're trying to maintain power, the struggle is to not be in the space of power. You have to be outside of it, kind of thing.
Like the figure could be the Iraq war here. We want, or any war, right? And since the 1960s, you blame the president for the war. The president is the evil one. It doesn't focus on any of the benefits of the war, the economic benefits. It doesn't focus on all the people who got rich off the war. It doesn't focus on all of the crimes that were peripheral to the war. It wasn't focusing on the media who perpetuated lies about the war in order to make it happen. You just blame Bush. Bush is like exempt from any criticism,
Bush and the neocons.
Except for words. He's not responsible in any way for it. So the power takes the fall, and the system keeps moving in exactly the way that it was moving already. We need a new war. We need a new export market.
I did have the Mandeville stuff, right, where he's getting this idea of the evil genie, and he cites Mandeville twice, which I take to mean that this is incredibly important because he doesn't cite much. Bernard Mandeville is a late 17th, early 18th century philosopher. He says, I feel like I have demonstrated here. This is Mandeville saying that neither the friendly qualities and kind affections that are natural to man, nor the real virtues he is capable of acquiring by reason and self-denial, that is, denial of our urges, or neither by virtues or by friendly qualities. Neither of these things are the foundations of society, but what we call evil in the world, moral as well as natural evil, is the grand principle that makes us sociable creatures, the solid basis, the life and support of all trades and employment without exception. That there we must look for the truth, the true origin of all arts and sciences. And the moment evil ceases, the society must be spoiled, if not totally dissolved. And this is a thesis he's put forward here, right? That that capitalism, this early form of circulation that he's talking about, it runs on vice, which he defines against virtue. Virtue is acting in the interest of other people. Vice is acting in the self-interest. That's a sort of simple thing. And it's called The Fable of the Bees, or Private Vices, Public Benefits. That's the subtitle. And he argues that our private vices, when you go out and you buy things for yourself, you employ whatever, bakers, prostitutes, smiths, whatever, then those people employ other people to renew their trades, et cetera, et cetera. He says society runs on vice. And if you eliminate the evil, you eliminate what holds society together. And he got into major disputes. One of them with, Adam Smith, right? Because Adam Smith believed that we could have virtuous, consumption. And others also hated his, like Bishop Berkeley attacked him too for his theory of immorality being the core of society. That's why he's referencing him here. That I think that's part of where this whole idea comes from, is this theory that society runs on vice and evil. And I mean, this guy's theory is that he, quote, private vices by the dexterous management of a skillful politician may be turned into public benefits, end quote. But suggesting that if we try to educate the masses with, as I was saying earlier, with the intention of removing, setting up these charity schools and getting rid of their moral imperfections that are corrupting our Arnold style, sweetness and light culture is the best everyone's thought and done kind of society, if we try to educate them out of that, some people think, okay, that's good. But he's saying here, no, that's what we run on this, right? Society runs on evil. The moment evil ceases, society is spoiled, if not totally dissolved.
But he doesn't stop there, right? That you're speaking strictly about capitalism. And he's saying this goes back to Western philosophy, back to Plato, that the real is rational. And we are facing the return of the irrational, which is evil, according to even Plato, the material, or at least the Manichaeanism interpretation of Plato. And we're facing the return of evil because the evil has always been there, and the evil has always been the engine, and the matter that is blocking our view of the good has always been full of energy, as opposed to the theorists' ideas that lack energy. They're wisps. They're simulated from the beginning. So if he brings this up several times, we're setting up for a battle of the end times. And if you're any kind of theorist, this might be a good way to conclude. If you're any type of theorist, then you have to decide, will you be on the side of the sheep or will you be on the side of the goats? Because we're going to have a face down with reality, with the return of the object. And if you are the type of person that thinks that reality is real, it's subject to the capacities of reason, it's subject to the capacities of our ability to know and make sense of, then you're going to be in for a rude awakening. So he's saying, I'm just going to skip to the end. I'm going to take the side of the evil genie. I'm going to take the side of matter, of the world, of the direction that everything's already going. He's drawing a dividing line between himself and basically everyone else in terms of not just capitalism, especially capitalism, but especially the history of philosophy and the history of history, saying we got it wrong and we're about ready for our rude awakening for having got it wrong.
Yeah, he says a lot of stuff. I was going to bring up just at the end his dunks on the masses that, like, I know probably...
Oh, can you read that? That's my favorite part.
There's a couple... I don't know. He says a couple times. I mean, at one point he says the best example... he's talking about something before that, but he's saying the best example of this is the masses. They are not at all an object of oppression or manipulation. The masses do not have to be liberated, and in any case, they cannot be. All their trans-political powers in being there as pure object. That is to say, in opposing their silence and their absence of desire against any political wish to make them speak. And there's more stuff. I mean, I don't know if that was the section you were thinking of. Talks about like the stupefying power of the mass as object. The masses incarnate the pure object of the political, the ideal of an absolute power.
I was looking for the part when he says, we theorists, we've always figured out the masses. We've known them. We knew that they were oppressed. We knew that they were immiserated. We psychoanalysts knew that they were like under the burden of the father. But maybe they weren't ever like that. Maybe they always knew their power. They always didn't give a shit. And this just kind of brings back to the way that, you know, when you talk to a normal person about philosophy, they don't feel like you're right about them. You feel like you're right about them because you've read Marx or read Freud, and you go, yeah, I know you, but from the outside. So part of the return of the object or the revenge of the object is proving their not caring was more true than your theorizing about them not caring. They always knew what they were.
I like the part when he's talking also just about the masses as like, there's like, I took it to be that there's a traditional theory that you have, you know, some authority at the top that like rules the masses. And I think, you know, he kind of reverses it, right? And he's like, the masses, you know, he's like, it's no longer power that pulls the masses in its wake. It's the masses that drag power down to its fall, which sounds optimistic, but it's actually not in a way. It's like that the power, in a way, it's implying that the power that we have right now that we complain about, it's like the masses want it in a way. It's like,
this is extremely anti-anarchist
yeah.
They want it there, and they don't want it there because they're stupid. They want it there so they have someone to blame, and if it comes to it, they have someone to kill.
Exactly.
They don't want to be running around looking for who to kill. They want to know him, see him. He's up there. When shit goes down, that's who we kill.
Yeah, I mean, and I was also going to say quickly that I think what's interesting about this is it sounds like, I mean, he's saying a lot of things that kind of more right-leaning, like liberals and libertarians say about the masses, right? I mean, it has this kind of like, I mean, I know it's not, but it has this kind of feel, like I feel like a lot of right-wing libertarian types who just kind of want to reduce human beings to like rational actors, which of course Baudrillard isn't doing, but there's a sense in which there is this realism. You guys were talking about it as a kind of realism, and I think at one point even quotes Machiavelli, right? At one point. And it's true. I've actually been grading essays on Machiavelli's The Prince, and I at the same time that I was reading this, and I was like, oh wow, there is actually a lot of overlap, because for Machiavelli, the whole thing is like the public is fickle. They're desirous. They get bored. They need to be entertained, right? They need to be shown the way. And that's why it's okay for you to do amoral things, because insofar as it works to stupefy these fickle masses who don't know what they want, who just want someone over them to tell them what to do. But like, you also can't, you know, be too tyrannical, because then they'll turn against you, right? Like you were saying, they want someone to blame. It's like very similar to Machiavelli and realism.
They also want someone fun, right?
Yes, exactly.
They want Donald Trump. They do not want Hillary Clinton.
Well, this fits perfectly with Machiavelli's conception of virtue, right? It's like the virtue, like in the sense of Machiavellian sense, is a leader who is this political craftsman, which does not mean virtue in the moralist sense. It means virtue in being like a tactician, and part of that tactician is being entertaining. Having it's all about the politics of appearance, right? It's all about how do you seem to the masses? Are you fitting in with what they want? And right, and like if you're really good at it, then you have this kind of Machiavellian virtue. But the kind of old moralist idea is irrelevant for that. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to just read this because most of the left theory I feel like we read kind of wants to turn its back on that kind of realism. Talk about, you know, and even I was having really good conversations with some people in our Discord actually, and you know, one of the things that kind of came up is this classic thing. It's like, you know, people always want to say that the public is stupid, but like, you know, they know what they want and they want to mobilize, and it's like there's that classic line I feel like in some leftist circles, and Baudrillard is definitely coming hard against that.
He was definitely more, his language style, his writing style was definitely more of, because his teacher was Henri Lefebvre, right? He was much more Marxist sounding before, whereas this sounds much more Nietzschean sounding.
Yeah.
He has a Lefebvre to Nietzsche split, and now the critique is no longer a historical morale. How do I say that? Historical morality critique. It's more of an aristocratic critique.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, the increasing influence of Nietzsche on his later works. Because, some of these ideas like reversibility are building on Nietzschean concepts. I like his jokes, right? Like the best kinds of jokes are about reversibility. Like the psychologist and the rat tells us that he's perfectly conditioned the psychologist to give him a piece of cheese every time he pushes the button.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that goes into a lot. That's like a form of a lot of stuff here, right? Like being a social theorist, thinking about political economy, a lot of the time your object is the public. And the public reverses into the masses, which has this inertia, right? Like it's always resisting sort of change and movement, inertia. And the mass appears as something that doesn't want change, doesn't want things thrust upon them. The masses being the pure object that has vanished from the horizon of the subject, as he puts it at one point.
Yeah.
Pure object, again, being like the ecstasy of the social, where, the passion of the person to throw off their subjectivity and encounter the object. Well, there you have it. You have the pure object of the social, which are the masses. And the object, again, performs a reversal. He said the masses know they're powerless and they don't want power. We reproach them for these signs of stupidity and passivity, but they're not that at all, he says.
Yeah, I'm reading this. This is a good part.
Right? That's
They're very snobbish.
They're very snobbish. I love that.
They're snobbish. Yeah, they're discerning. Maybe he should have said they're very discerning about
and
what
they want to
want.
delegate. They want to delegate their choice to someone else, to something else, and they're snobbish about that.
And what makes them happy is kind of like knowing that someone else has it worse, or that it could be worse for them. So I was thinking about this in terms of, put your finger down on any leftist publication or leftist commentator, right? Put your finger down anywhere. They'll definitely say things correctly. Like, oh, in 1950s America, you could work at a gas station and support your family while your wife stays home and raises 3 kids, and you would buy a house for $30,000 to $10,000. You'd own your own house on a gas station attendant employee. And that doesn't change. That doesn't interest people. That doesn't fascinate people. What fascinates people is there's immigrants coming here to take your jobs. Not you could have had it better. And in this very country that you live in, your grandparents had it much better than you did. But rather, the fascination that you're going to lose what little you do have is far more interesting than a story about how government legislation could change to bring back your grandparents' or parents' quality of life.
Yeah, and speaking for the masses and what they want is what theorists are trying to do, right? Trying to understand their object, grasp it, and then speak for them. And we talk about how they're alienated or how they're repressed. And humanist Marxists think they're alienated, and then we get into the whole subject-object dialectic, which he wants to leave behind, right? Or we talk about how they're repressed and they have these unconscious desires that in order to be part of a functioning socius, we have to repress those desires, and they come out in antisocial ways. We have to curb them into creative and productive outlets instead, right? These are all ways of trying to find out what is wrong with the masses. We assume they're stupid and there's something wrong with them. Find out what's wrong with them. They're alienated from the objects. They're repressed in their psyches. And then we try to figure out what to do to make them better.
Yeah, they're pushed by capitalist ideology. Yeah, I mean, This is like a black pill that I agree with on like for the most part in Baudrillard. Yeah, I love it. Like right above the quote you were reading earlier too, Eric. He's like, not only do people surely not want to be told what they want, but they don't even want to know it, and it's not even certain that they want to want.
Yeah, funny. And I was thinking of which movie was it? One of those new Jordan Peele movies. Where the white girlfriend is sitting in the car with the black boyfriend, and the cop pulls him over, and she starts speaking for him and defending him, and the guy is saying, you know, stop, this is not helping, and she's like, no, you shouldn't accept this. This isn't what you like kind of deserve, right? And she starts speaking for him and telling the cop off, and this is causing a whole, you know, well, this is one of the major tension builder in the movie, but I think it's also, you know, that's another version of what he's talking about, right? Right? Kind of she becomes the theorist of the masses. She becomes the theorist of race. She becomes the theorist of oppression. And she starts talking for the oppressed object of her investigation to the authorities. She intercedes on their behalf. And it's like, that's not what is required here. That's not what is wanted. That's something else. And we don't know what that is except for these fatal strategies, which are to adopt the strategies of the object, which performs these reversals and regresses or pulls together in these fronts of inertia and non-movement. Because what do we need? We always need movement. We need growth. We need, you know, capitalism requires this.
We need to become more obscene. The theorists need to become less academic, less cloistered, less talking down their nose, and they need to become more obscene, more informatic.
This way of describing, I find myself convinced by broadly, but I don't agree with the thesis that I'm not even sure Baudrillard is making. It's more like a Pills thesis that, well, then we don't need to care about any of this stuff because it doesn't matter anyway. Like, I'm not convinced by that because I still think that there's a way of talking about the effect that the simulation and the spectacle is having that has like real import to people. And there's a way of, and I think actually, if anything, looking at it, things from this perspective can then also help in understanding, okay, if you want to push for something, you need to stop, you know, with the rational argumentation. You just need to make it more fascinating, right? And it's like, so like in a way, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about stuff and you shouldn't fight for things, but it does maybe tell you about how you should be doing those things. Because understanding what's actually like taking up space, and the reasons why it's taking up space, which I'm broadly sympathetic to the way it's being framed in this reading, then you can learn about a better way of framing things so that they take up space in this really fatalistic kind of evil way that it, whatever the spectacle, whatever word we're going to use.
Basically, if you want to be a theorist, it's better to be a film director than a writer.
Yeah, probably. I mean, this even goes back to Rorty, right? Do you remember when we read the Richard Rorty? He kind of made that point that the things that actually make an impact are the literature and movies. And I mean, it's not exactly the same point, but I do remember Rorty's making that kind of claim that, you know, the theory that I think he called Habermas maybe the most correct, but also is going to have the least impact in the world because, you know, it's not, it's very not fascinating. That's for sure.
Yeah, like I think this text is seductive.
I have a video coming out about this soon. I think I'm going to call it. Nice. I think I'm going to call it "Postmodernism is Good." Actually.
Okay, nice. But yeah, that's my final thought. So I liked it. I enjoyed it.
I felt like it was a breath of fresh air. Like, okay, Baudrillard does not get really studied. He barely gets read. Maybe like a chapter from Simulacra and Simulation. But this is some real shit that I think it deserves its time in the sun. But
I feel like our audience is going to hate it though.
Well, I mean, there's a reason that no theorist would want to hear this because he's just calling their job stupid.
But even people who are interested, obviously, like we have a lot of Marxists in our audience, and right? They're
Yeah,
going
I
to hate
think
it too.
Marxists maybe sorry Marxists for this one. Yeah, it's not so hopeful for the Marxist point of view.
Or the anarchist point of view, or any kind of revolutionary point of view in a way.
But maybe it's just more radical.
Yeah.
The most radical.
Yeah, like he says something.
Don't bring
about-
up something new, Eric. We're winding down.
Yeah,
You're
we're
trying to
winding
you're
down.
trying to do it again.
I mean, just about the revolution. Isn't there a quote in here about the revolution? You know, the revolution on the side of the object is going to be obscure and silent. It's not going to be something grand and visible. He kind of has this. I wish I could just find the quote quickly, but I can't. It's in there somewhere.
A withdrawal of the will.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like silence, non-engagement. I mean these we're adopting the strategies of the object. I don't know. These are these strategies something we should can I say that a strategy would be like a strategy of strategic non-engagement, strategic silence, strategic withdrawal into inertia.
I would prefer not to.
And non-compliance. Yeah, I really did think of that quote from the what's his name's
Bartleby.
Bartleby. Yeah.
I have something to conclude on, because when we think of strategy, we think of, oh, what are we going to do next to further the leftist cause or something like that. So an interviewer actually asked him this question. This book is called Fatal Strategies. And the interviewer asks, a patron sent this to me, so I'm not taking credit for it.
Oh, cool.
But when you speak of the strategy of the fatal, what interests me most is the strategy. What is to be done? The interviewer asks. And Baudrillard responds, it's not really strategy. That's a play on words to dramatize the total passage from the subject to the object, whether you call it the revenge of the object or the evil genius of matter. It's not representable, but it's power all the same. In fact, I would go along with calling it the principle of evil, of irreconciliation, the way the good is the principle of reconciliation. That exists, it's inextricable, and it cannot be destroyed. So it's an inevitability, which is the fatality of it, is the world's going to go the way that it's going to go. And you basically choose a side as a strategy, not as a strategy to become the agent of history that changes things. And maybe that's relieving, or maybe that's depressing to you. I kind of find it a little bit relieving.
Yeah, I think I kind of do too.
Yeah, I mean, it's something else, right? Like, how do you organizing?
It's better than, oh, did you buy your clothes from Bangladesh? Because then you're becoming a subject of capitalism and perpetuating the system. Like, I don't know where I bought it from. I bought the Hanes shirt from Walmart, man.
Yeah, like it's hard for me to leave behind the idea that still, like improving the workplace, improving healthcare, these sorts of things create social conditions for revolutions or at least better participation in politics. It's hard for me to leave that behind. And I don't know if Baudrillard's really asking me to do that, but the idea of an upper class or a bourgeoisie having power and the masses desiring that power in some kind of revolution, that's something he's saying is not, the masses don't want power. Other politicians know that power is the orchestration of its own disappearance. And that's why, the politicians who are in the know will, not want to be in the power position. They'll put someone else there. Like Donald Trump is a stooge, right? He's just, in a sense, he's just taking the fall for the establishment. But
yeah, you can throw Biden in there and he's not even conscious most days.
Yeah, same thing, right? Like he's reneging on so many promises he's made.
I thought we were finishing
he's going to
this.
be hated for that.
I thought we were wrapping this up.
Biden's an object. He doesn't even know he's there. That's the strategy. Biden is the perfect strategy of the object by not even knowing you're there.
That's funny.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
we'll end on that
I guess
note.
be obscene. That's the ending. No, be obscene.
Destroy the scene. It's all a show. Don't buy into the show. Become object. All right. Well, guys, we will wrap it on that note. Been fun.
Yeah.
I covered each chapter of this book on the video prescription of the Patreon if you're interested in more. So this was
cool.
This was basically 2/3 of one chapter, and I did 8 episodes on the entire book because it was so fascinating. He goes into so much other stuff, just like inventing political subjects, like the obese.
Well, we could do another episode on another chapter. I'd be up for that.
I'd like to introduce to you guys the obese because it's funny. Anyway,
sounds fun.
We're done for now.
That would be awesome.
We're done for now. Maybe we'll pick that up. Take care, everybody.
Peace.
All right.